Welcome, US 1 students. Mrs. Borison here. I sure miss you all. I miss school. I miss telling you about putting your cell phones away. Or hey, take your earbuds out. Now that I got that out of my system, let's begin here. For today's lesson, you'll need out that white sheet we gave you in school. It had 3 maps on it. It was the only white sheet we gave you. If you don't have it, you can print one off on It's Learning. If that doesn't work, then you could just write in your notebook the brief notes we will be taking. Everyone will be filling in the blanks today and coloring the maps. If you don't have the sheet, you could just write out the short sentences instead of filling in the blanks as your notes. To begin with, can you all please write notes at the top of your white sheet? We will not be turning this in. It is your notes sheet for today. Next, you will need out 3 different colored pencils for the maps. We will be using green, orange, and blue, but you can really use any 3 different colors you have. And one last thought before I begin the PowerPoint presentation. You can plan to pause the presentation to give yourself time to fill in the blanks on your note sheet as you need. So today we're going to talk about compromises that postponed warfare. I will tell you about the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and Ms. Kadonsky will tell you about the Compromise of 1850. So, if we go back to last week, you learned about the North and the South, and those two, how they compared. And so that was sectionalism in action there. So the North and the South are starting to identify more with their own region than with the best interest of the whole country. So they start to divide themselves out over many different issues. Slavery is the obvious one. So the North doesn't have slavery, and the South has slavery. The North values industry, commerce. The South starts to focus more and more on agriculture with the work done by the slaves. And so this disagreement in the mid-1800s will only continue as westward expansion comes about and we get more and more land out west. And everybody starts to wonder, is slavery going to expand out west into the Western territories? Notice this is the question at the top of your map sheet. So will slavery expand into the Western territories? So as we get more land, and there's a process for territories to become states, what are they going to pick? Slavery or not slavery? So how do territories become states? Territories are land acquisitions. So like the Louisiana Purchase, we buy it from France, or Texas is annexed, or the Mexican Cession. So as we get this new land, it is under the control of the national government. And as soon as 60,000 people live in a territory or more, they could petition Congress to become a state. So California takes very little time with the gold rush and all of the people heading out west for that to become a state. Wisconsin, we become a territory in 1836, and then we become a state in 1848. So Congress has to approve, and each state has to write its own constitution. And if Congress gives a go-ahead, then that territory can become a state. Now today, as we focus on the Missouri Compromise, we're going to be focusing on power in the government. And so the South wanted to hang on to power in the government. And specifically, we're going to be looking at Congress, so the legislative branch. So the Southerners are going to start to lose their power in the government leading up to the Civil War. So if you go back and think about Congress as having the 2 houses, so if you remember, the House of Representatives was the one that was based on population. So the states with a larger population would have more representation. And in the Senate, it was based on equality, so every state had 2 votes. And we're not going to be focusing today on the House of Representatives. The North has more people, and so they will have more representatives in the House of Representatives. But we're going to focus on the Senate, where before the Missouri Compromise, and then even for a little bit after, it's going to be balanced. The number of senators from free states and the number of senators from slave states. So if we get into 1819, when Missouri wanted to enter the United States as a slave state, at that time our country had 22 states. And as it happened, 11 of them were free states and 11 of them were slave states. So members of Congress became very upset when Missouri wanted to enter as a slave state, because you can imagine preserving that balance between the slave states and the free states was very important. So that way no one side would have too much power, too many votes, or would be able to pass laws to favor their side. So keeping that balance of free and slave states in the Senate, where each state would have 2 votes, was very important. So if you could write that down at the top of your sheet after the Missouri Compromise, if you could write keeping a balance of free states and slave states in the Senate, maybe that could help you to remind yourself about the Missouri Compromise, to maybe keep them straight a little bit. So at that time, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. And here's where your notes sheet would officially begin, so filling in the lines. The Missouri Compromise, Henry Clay is going to work tirelessly on this one and the Missouri, or the Compromise of 1850 as well. But the compromise will end up looking like this. So on your notes sheet, if you could put Missouri on the first line after number 1, and if you could put slave on the line after 2. If you don't have this notes sheet, you could write out these statements in your notes. But the Missouri Compromise means that Missouri will come in as a slave state. So there we will get our 23rd state. And Maine will also come in at the same time to preserve that balance as a free state. And there's our 24th state. And we will have 12 slave states and 12 free states. And that balance in the Senate will be preserved. Another part to the Missouri Compromise then, so there's Missouri coming in, there's Maine coming in, and then to resolve any disputes that might come up in the future over the territory or the land that we're getting in the West, they decided to put a line on the map. So if you could write on your sheet, the rest of the Louisiana Territory was divided at the 36° 30-minute north latitude line. All new states formed north of the line would be free states. Slavery would be permitted in the new states south of the line. So, in order to prevent any problems in the future, they draw a line on the map. So you can see it right over here. This red line is basically like in line with the bottom of Missouri. And they say this is that 36° 30-minute north line. They say that north of the line is going to be free. This is all unorganized territory, but someday if they decide to be coming into the Union as a state, they would be free. And then south of the line, they could have slavery. That was their plan to avoid any future conflicts. So if you look at your sheet, can I move this? Very good. Come on. Sorry. That might be as good as it gets. So if you look at your sheet, it should be filled out like this. At this time, you will need your 3 different colors. So you will color the key boxes at the bottom of your sheet first. You don't need to use the same colors as I did for your map. That's what we're going to do. We're going to color that map on the right there. You just need to use your color choices correctly. I use green for free states or territories, and I use orange for slave states or territories, and I'm going to use blue for popular sovereignty. But at this time, you need to color your free states with the color you chose. You'll see at the top that I wrote down here that I went with green for the free states. Whatever color you went with, you use that. And you're going to color the slave states the color that you chose. So I went with orange, says so right up here. Feel free to pause now to give yourself a time to color. So now that you've finished coloring your first map, that map is a good representation of a visual of the Missouri Compromise. So notice that Missouri is the slave state color that you went with, right? And Maine is the free state color that you went with. And above that 36-degree, 30-minute north latitude line, the U.S. territory, this should be your free color. Come on. There we go. So for the Missouri Compromise, it worked for a bit. So for the next 15 years, well, the next 15 years were easy because no state entered the Union. But after that, the balance was relatively easy to preserve because Arkansas came in 1836 as a slave state, and shortly thereafter, Michigan comes in as a free state. Florida and Texas come in in 1845 as slave states, followed shortly thereafter by Iowa and Wisconsin as free states. So that balance in the Senate was preserved, where there were equal senators, an equal number of senators from the slave states and an equal number of senators from the free states for a while. That is until we get the Compromise of 1850 with California. Ms. Kadonsky is going to pick up there, and I will talk to you later.